They say cemeteries are for the dead, but I've worked around graves long enough to know the living can be far more unsettling. Still, nothing prepared me for the day a storm rolled through our town, and a ghost decided to remind me that some spirits refuse to rest. What I'm about to share isn't a campfire tale or some urban legend. This happened to me, a cemetery operations coordinator, during what should have been just another funeral service. But that stormy afternoon, as lightning cracked across the sky and mourners drifted away, I saw something staring back at me through the rain-speckled window. Something that should not have been there. Working in a cemetery, people always assume my job is gloomy or depressing. The truth is, most days are quiet, routine, and even peaceful. Families come in mourning. Services are handled with dignity, and then I'm left to paperwork, groundskeeping schedules, or making sure flowers get delivered to the right headstones. But storms change things. A cemetery in the rain carries a different weight, almost as if the veil between the living and the dead thins with every clap of thunder. That day, we had a funeral scheduled for a man named Richard Whitmore, an older gentleman, well known in town, with family and friends gathering despite the heavy storm clouds building above. By the time the hearse pulled in, the wind had picked up, bending the trees along the cemetery path. Mourners huddled beneath umbrellas as lightning flickered in the distance. I stood near the office building, making sure everything was in place, while the priest hurried through the service. The storm was worsening, and people were anxious to get home. By the time the casket was lowered and the final prayers were spoken, the rain was pouring hard enough to blur the headstones. Most of the mourners scattered quickly, cars fishtailing slightly on the slick pavement as they drove out. I stayed behind, partly out of duty, partly because I always do a final sweep after services. Sometimes families leave items behind, rosaries, prayer cards, even personal belongings, and I make sure they're collected. The grounds were empty within minutes, or so I thought. I ducked back into the small cemetery office, shaking water from my jacket. The office itself is nothing remarkable, just a modest building with a front room, a filing area, and a single window that looks out over the cemetery. That window has always unnerved me. In the day, it frames the gravestones neatly, but at night, with only the faint glow of street lamps, it looks more like a dark mirror. I sat down to finish some paperwork, thunder rumbling overhead, when I felt it, that prickling sensation along the back of my neck. The kind you get when someone is staring at you. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves, just a storm. But something made me look up past the glow of the desk lamp to that window, and that's when I froze. Pressed against the glass, half obscured by raindrops and streaks of lightning, was a man's face. His skin was pale, his eyes wide and fixed directly on me. The water distorted his features, but I could still see the sorrow in his expression. I shot up from my chair, so fast it nearly tipped. The office door was locked, and I knew no one should be out there. The storm was violent, the cemetery empty. My heart pounded in my throat as I crept toward the window, each step heavy against the floorboards. But when I reached it, the face was gone, just sheets of rain cascading over rows of headstones. I told myself it must have been a trick of the light, maybe even my own reflection caught at a strange angle. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the glass, clear as day despite the rain, was the outline of a handprint, not mine, too large, too defined, and the fingers left streaks downward, as if whoever had pressed their hand against the window had slowly slid it down before vanishing. I stumbled back, my mind racing. Was someone still out there? A mourner who had stayed behind? Someone seeking shelter? I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself out into the storm. The cemetery was empty. I swept the beam across the rows, the fresh mound of earth where Mr. Whitmore had just been laid to rest, and the slick paths glistening under the rain. No movement, no sound but the wind and thunder. Still shaken, I returned inside and tried to collect myself. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from the funeral director who had overseen the service. "Thank you again for staying late. Mr. Whitmore's son mentioned you. He said his father always admired the cemetery staff and how respectful you all are. Funny thing, he swore he saw his dad in the window as he was leaving. Guess grief does strange things." I nearly dropped the phone. My mouth went dry. His son had seen someone in the window too. Not during the storm when I was inside, but earlier when people were leaving. I turned slowly back toward the glass, my reflection faint against the storm's fury outside. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. Directly across from the office, in the rows of headstones, stood Richard Whitmore's fresh grave. The angle lined up perfectly with the window. The face I had seen, those sorrowful eyes, had been looking not at me, but back toward his own burial site. The realization chilled me to the bone. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the image of him, soaked pale, pressed against the glass, refusing to leave the place where his body now lay. I've worked countless funerals since that storm, and though I've seen grief twist people into believing they catch glimpses of the ones they've lost, nothing ever compared to that night. Some say the dead move on. Others say they linger until they're ready. But I'll tell you this. If you ever find yourself working late in a cemetery, especially on a stormy night, don't trust the windows, because sometimes the eyes staring back at you don't belong to the living, and sometimes they're not looking at you at all.